Hello, and welcome to the Dark Reading News Desk from Black Hat USA 2025 in Las Vegas, where I'm joined by Varun Sharma, CEO of StepSecurity, and Ashish Kurmi, CTO of StepSecurity, to discuss their new research titled When Changed Files Changed Everything, Uncovering and Responding to the TJ Actions Supply Chain Breach. Now, Varun and Ashish, I understand that your research concerns a recent supply chain attack involving the TJ Actions GitHub action. What happened there? And then tell me about sort of your session at the show.
Yeah, so in fact, it was on a Friday afternoon, on the 14th of March.
As it often is Friday.
Yeah, that we got a Slack notification from our automated detection system. And something about that detection seemed off, so we started investigating and soon realized that the TJ Actions changed files GitHub action had been compromised. And the next day, there was a high severity CVE that was published, which confirmed that all versions of that action had indeed been compromised. And in a few days, CISA published an advisory about it. And this was not just any open source component, it was something that was being used at that time by over 23,000 public repositories, including from organizations like GitHub and Microsoft and Meta and so on, and in thousands of private repositories across organizations. And it was any workflow that was using this action was leaking its CI/CD credentials in the build log.
Wow. And were there compromises as a result of this? Or did you catch it in time? Or did folks catch it in time?
So we actually caught it 3 hours after the TJ Actions was compromised. So after we detected this incident, we actually went back and looked at the repository to figure out what had happened. And we saw that the repository was compromised 3 hours before we received the detection. But then we realized that it was not that the attackers had compromised the TJ Actions repository. That was not their entry point. The entry point was a chained supply chain attack, where the TJ Actions change files action was compromised due to the compromise of review dog action, which in turn got compromised due to the compromise of another repository. So the attack actually originated in the Spot Bugs organization. And then the attacker sort of managed to go through multiple repositories, which eventually led to the compromise of the TJ Actions change files action, which is quite popular and being used by tens of thousands of repositories.
But for when this compromise happened, then for almost a day, all the workflows that were using it were leaking credentials in their build logs. And so we found that there were hundreds of public repositories that had leaked credentials and things like persistent personal access tokens and AWS access keys, and these were all public. And so in fact, we reached out to a lot of them and created GitHub issues informing them that their build logs had been leaking credentials. So there were definitely a lot of credential compromises that happened, but from those, we are not aware of any further supply chain attacks that happened because of those credentials that were compromised from TJ Actions.
So thankfully, folks such as StepSecurity caught it early, and that probably limited the blast radius quite a bit. But compared to a lot of the other supply chain issues that we hear about pretty much every week now involving components and things like components that are just in the development process somewhere, how bad did this stack up? How bad did the blast radius potentially become? Could it have potentially become? Because credentials sounds bad, but I guess, could you put it in context how bad this could have gotten?
For me, it actually took me back to the Log4j incident, which happened a few years ago. Because the unique thing about Log4j incident was that anyone could exploit it. Because you have so many endpoints that were using Log4j, the vulnerable version, the exploitation was quite trivial. And it sort of reminded me of that because, like Varun said, you have a large number of open source repositories that were using this component, and they were leaking credentials that were out in the open for anyone to steal and abuse. So in terms of severity, I would say it was quite severe given these credentials were available in build logs, and these build logs are available to anyone on the internet.
Yeah, and GitHub Actions, is like one of the most popular CI/CD platforms, and this TJ Actions change files is a very popular third-party action, and most organizations use it. So, pretty much any organization that was using GitHub Actions, was potentially impacted.
Thinking about a lot of the development adjacent like supply chain issues that we see today, I know folks are trying to solve the issues that are just naturally created from like these prolific components and whatnot, actions being used in the development process through things like provenance and whatnot. But how big of a problem is this really where something that from a small company to a major enterprise might integrate into their development pipeline somewhere, and then surprise, 20,000 people have exposed credentials? Is this something that's getting better since the days of Log4j, Log4Shell, or are we still just not there yet?
I would say we have a long way to go. So this particular supply chain attack happened in the CI/CD environment, and traditionally CI/CD environments have been overlooked by enterprises. So enterprises invest heavily in code and application security. They invest heavily in cloud or infrastructure security, but CI/CD sort of like remains unmonitored, overlooked. Yet, CI/CD has access to elevated credentials. You have cloud credentials, publishing credentials that live in CI/CD. Your software builds actually go through CI/CD. So I would say, as a industry as a whole, now we have more awareness about these issues. But in my opinion, we still have a long way to go.
Do you feel the same?
Yeah, definitely. And especially so this attack was detected by StepSecurity Hardened Runner, which is an EDR for CI/CD environments. And so like Ashish mentioned, a lot of organizations have EDRs for their desktops and laptops and for their production environments. But typically they have zero security monitoring for their CI/CD runners. And so that's and until that changes, these kind of incidents will keep happening, and it'll be harder and harder to detect them.
Now, I understand it was caught early, but are any organizations still vulnerable to this? Is it something that you had to manually fix? And if not, you still could be under the gun, sort of? Or is this something that has, for the most part, been fully addressed?
So those compromised tags have been fixed. In fact, in about 24 hours, GitHub had removed the TJ Actions changed files repository from GitHub and then brought it back. And when it was brought back, all of the malicious code had been removed and it had been cleaned up. So as of now, it is safe to use, but organizations still should have a process around what kind of third-party actions are they using, and follow certain best practices so that they don't get impacted the next time there is a similar compromise.
Thinking about final takeaways, just sort of as we wrap up, do you see this as a close call that could have gotten a lot worse and should be a lesson learned? I guess I'd love to ask each of you, as you're now reflecting back on this research in the context of Black Hat, what are you thinking about, and what would you say is your big takeaway?
Yeah, so I would start, like I said, CI/CD has traditionally been overlooked, and it has, elevated credentials, and we as an industry should start paying more attention to CI/CD and have better monitoring in place for CI/CD to prevent these supply chain attacks. So like I said, this supply chain attack actually originated somewhere else, and it was detected in TJ Action, and it's very scary that the attacker remained in the stealth mode pretty much for about 2 weeks. So when they were moving from repository A to repository B to repository C, eventually they got caught in repository D, but we no one could catch them while they were actually going through these supply chain attacks.
Excellent. And you?
And in fact, it was a close call. And the interesting thing about this incident was that the impact was much higher for public repositories because it was leaking credentials in the build logs. But had it been exfiltrating credentials through a command and control center, then even the private repositories would have been impacted, and then the blast radius and the impact would have been much higher. So that is why a lot of organizations kind of reached out to us, and they expressed how much of a close call it was, and how they're going to start taking it more seriously. But it was definitely a close call.
Excellent. Well, Varun, Ashish, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate you telling me all about your research. My name is Alex Culafi here at the Black Hat USA 2025 Dark Reading News Desk. Thank you very much and see you next time.